The laughter hit Lillian Carter like a hand across the face. Not because it was loud. Because it was comfortable. The kind of laughter that comes from men who have never once considered that the woman holding the mop might have a mind sharper than anyone sitting at that table. Careful with that bucket, sweetheart. Richard Hargrove leaned back in his chair like he owned the air in the room. That floor probably costs more than your house. The boardroom erupted. Lillian kept moving the mop. Slow. Steady. Eyes down. She had learned a long time ago that reacting gave men like Richard exactly what they wanted. Proof that they had reached her. So she kept her face still and her hands moving, and she thought about Danielle instead. She always thought about Danielle when she needed to stay steady. Her daughter had believed in rooms like this one. Had sat at tables like this one. Had walked through these same glass doors with her Howard University degree and her compliance certification and her absolute, unshakable belief that doing the right thing inside a powerful institution actually meant something. Baby, you were braver than any of them ever deserved. Maybe she's here to give us a presentation, another man said. Mopping strategy. Very niche market. More laughter. A third voice. Or maybe she's just lost. The laughter sharpened. Lillian reached the far corner and turned her mop slowly. Her knuckles were tight around the handle, but her face gave nothing away. 6 years she had cleaned this building. 6 years she had moved through these hallways like furniture, like something the walls contained but no one really saw. She had chosen this job after the legal fees took everything. When she first realized which company it was, she had stood outside on the sidewalk for 20 minutes before walking through the door. Then she thought about Danielle. And she walked in. She was turning toward the exit when the boardroom doors opened. Han Jun-seo walked in. The laughter stopped the way sound stops when the power cuts, sudden and total. Executives straightened. Smiles recalibrated. Richard cleared his throat with the particular urgency of a man trying to become someone else in under 3 seconds. Mr. Han. We were just about to begin. But Jun-seo was not looking at Richard. He had stopped moving entirely. His eyes were on Lillian. She had her back to him, reaching for her bucket. She didn't hear the doors. Didn't hear the silence that fell behind her like a curtain dropping. Jun-seo stood very still. The kind of still that happens when something reaches inside a person and grips them before they can prepare. He had not known she worked here. That fact moved through him like cold water. He had assumed, because assuming was easier than looking, that she was somewhere in Atlanta living quietly. The way people who save your life sometimes do when they don't know that's what they did. He had not looked for her. That was his failure. His first one. Not his only one. He walked forward, past the table, past Richard's carefully reconstructed smile, past the leather chairs and the polished surface that reflected everything and absorbed nothing. He stopped beside her. Lillian turned, sensing someone near. When she saw his face, the bucket handle slipped. For a moment the room had no sound at all. Then Jun-seo lowered his head. Slowly. Deliberately. The bow his grandmother had pressed into him like a thumbprint when he was 7 years old. For elders who have earned respect through living, Jun-ah, not through title. Good morning, he said quietly. Ma'am. Someone at the table whispered. What is happening? Richard blinked. Once. Twice. Jun-seo raised his head and looked at Lillian with an expression that held more weight than everything else in the room combined. It's been a long time, he said. Lillian lifted her eyes. What was in them was not surprise. It was recognition. Tired, complicated, and real. Jun-seo, she said softly. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Board members exchanged glances. Richard leaned forward. You know each other? Neither of them answered him. And in that pause, something shifted. The balance of the room. The temperature of it. The invisible architecture of who mattered and who didn't rearranged itself without asking anyone's permission. Jun-seo turned to the table. His voice was calm. Carrying. Final. I believe an apology is owed. Richard laughed. The nervous kind. I'm sure she understands we were only. No, Jun-seo said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This company, he said, looking around the table slowly, would not exist without her. The silence that followed felt like thunder with nowhere to go. Richard's face went the color of old paper. Lillian shook her head gently at Juncio. You don't need to do this. You once told me something. His voice dropped. That dignity is the only wealth no one can steal. Her eyes softened with something private and old. She remembered. A cold night. A paper bag. A young man too proud to ask and too hungry to refuse. Richard stood up. Mr. Han, with respect, we are in the middle of a billion-dollar negotiation. Whatever personal history you have with the cleaning staff. Sit down, Richard. 4 words. No heat in them at all. Richard sat. Juncio looked at Lillian. Would you like to tell them what they've done? The mop handle trembled slightly in her hands. She looked around the room. At the men who had laughed. At the table that had never once held her daughter's name with any care. Then she took a slow breath. I don't think they know who they hurt. Richard frowned. What does that mean? Lillian looked at him directly for the first time. Come. Still. Absolute. They destroyed my daughter's life. The room went silent in a different way than before. And then she said the name. The one she said every morning when she woke up. Every night before she closed her eyes. The one she had carried through these marble hallways for 6 years like a prayer no one else could hear. Her name was Danielle Carter. Across the table, a younger board member went the color of ash. Richard noticed, and turned to him with eyes that had gone suddenly cold. You told me that file was gone, he hissed. The younger man's hands were flat on the table. It was, he whispered back. Lillian heard them. She didn't smile. She only said, very quietly, files disappear. Mothers don't. And Han Juncio reached into his jacket. If you've ever had to stand in a room where no one saw you, and chose dignity anyway, this channel was made for you. Some stories are not just about what happens. They're about the strength it takes to stand your ground, to protect your dignity, and to demand respect, even when the world tries to take it from you. If you've ever had to make a choice that tested your courage, or refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside, then you're in the right place. This channel tells stories about women who cannot be broken, and the people who learn, sometimes too late, that integrity cannot be bought. Welcome to Afro Korean Tales and Stories. The folder was thin. That was the first thing Richard noticed, that something capable of ending careers, ending freedom, ending everything he had spent 30 years constructing, could be so thin. Juncio set it on the table without drama. He didn't open it yet. That restraint was more frightening than anything else he could have done. Mrs. Carter, Juncio said quietly, without looking away from the board. Would you sit down? Richard's head snapped up. Absolutely not. She is not a party to this meeting. She is the reason for it. The words landed flat and final. Nobody moved. Lillian set her mop against the wall. She pulled out the chair at the far end of the table. Not the head, not a power position, just a seat. She sat down the way a woman sits when she has been standing a very long time. Richard looked at her. Then at Juncio. Then at the folder. His mind was doing what it had always done under pressure. Calculating. Who knew what? Who could be managed? Which version of events was still survivable? He had been doing that calculation for 3 years. My daughter graduated top of her class from Howard University, Lillian said. Her voice was quiet. Not performing. Just speaking. She had offers from 4 firms. She chose this one. Preston Cole, the youngest board member, 34, end of the table, stared at a point somewhere between the surface and his conscience. She was 29 when she found the discrepancy. Lillian folded her hands. She followed every protocol. Her direct supervisor first. Then legal. Then compliance oversight. She paused. And then the company came for her. Richard opened his mouth. Lillian kept going. The performance clause that terminated her contract was created 4 days after she filed her report. She said it the way you say something you have said to yourself 10,000 times. The documentation was backdated. That is an extraordinary accusation. Richard's voice had found its footing again, the flat procedural tone of a man who has rehearsed this. Yes, Lillian agreed. She looked at him without blinking. It is. Preston's left hand moved on the table. Junseok noticed. Richard noticed Junseok noticing. The air in the room shifted the way it does before something structural gives way. After they terminated her, Lillian continued, she spent 14 months trying to find work in her field. No one would hire her. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Not because of anything written down. Nothing you could take to court easily. Just phone calls. Quiet conversations. The kind of destruction that leaves no fingerprints. A board member at the far side cleared his throat. Nobody looked at him. She had a son, Lillian said. My grandson, Marcus. He was 4 when this started. The room went completely still. By the time it ended, she stopped. Something moved across her face. A compression, fast and controlled, like a door closed firmly on something that wanted out. She straightened. I found this job 6 years ago, she said. It was the only one available that covered what we needed. She looked around the table. I didn't know it was this company at first. When I realized, she paused. I almost left. She looked down at her hands. But Danielle believed you changed things from the inside. She told me that the last time we argued about it. She looked up. So I stayed. The silence after that was not the silence of indifference. It was the silence of people who can no longer pretend they don't understand what they're hearing. Junseok spoke. Mrs. Carter. She looked at him. I owe you an apology as well. The board members shifted. I learned about Danielle's case 6 months ago, he said. He didn't look away from her face. I should have moved sooner. I told myself I was being thorough. A pause. Thorough and afraid look very similar from the inside. Something complicated moved through Lillian's expression. Not anger. Not absolution. Something in between. Harder and more generous than either. You're here now, she said softly. He nodded once. Then he opened the folder. He turned it toward the board. A compliance report. Case number. Date filed. Employee name. Carter. Danielle R. This is the original. Unredacted. Cross-referenced with the performance clause documentation created 4 days after the report was filed. He let them look at it. The third-party audit firm has a full copy. External legal counsel has a copy. He looked at Richard. As of 40 minutes ago, so does the regulatory board. The color left Richard's face completely. Preston Cole closed his eyes. This meeting was never about the merger, Junseok said. It was about giving Mrs. Carter the one thing this company took from her daughter. He looked at the table. A room that finally listened. Richard's voice, when it came, was barely above a breath. You'll destroy this company. No, Junseok said. You did that. I was protecting. Yourself, Junseok said. Not harshly. Just with the flat, final quality of a truth that has waited long enough. Richard looked at Lillian. For the first time that morning he looked at her the way you look at a person. She met his gaze. She gave him nothing cruel. Nothing triumphant. Just the steady, undefeated gaze of a woman who had carried her daughter's name through every corridor of his empire and was still standing. Her name, Lillian said quietly, was Danielle Carter. Was past tense. The word landed like something breaking. No one in that room missed what it meant. Preston Cole stood up. His chair scraped against the marble. Every eye turned. His voice was unsteady. I want to speak to legal counsel. Then he looked at Lillian. I'm sorry, he said. Richard spun toward him. Preston. I saw the file. Preston's voice cracked down the middle. 3 years ago. I was an associate. I saw it and I said nothing and I have. He stopped. I have not slept a full night since. The room fractured. And in the silence that opened up, Lillian Carter did something no one expected. She nodded at Preston Cole. Once. Gently. Not forgiving him. Not condemning him. Just acknowledging that some confessions, however late, are still worth making. Then she stood, picked up her bucket, walked toward the door. Mrs. Carter, Juncio said. She paused without turning. Where would you like to go from here? She was quiet for a moment. I'd like to go somewhere I can call my grandson. She opened the door. His name is Marcus. He's 7. One beat. He looks just like his mother. The door closed behind her, and the most powerful boardroom in the building had never felt so empty. But Richard Hargrove was already reaching for his phone. And the look on his face was not the look of a man accepting defeat. It was the look of a man deciding how far he was willing to go. 15 years earlier, Han Juncio had sat outside a convenience store in Atlanta with exactly $4.37 in his pocket. He had counted it 3 times. Not because he hoped the number would change. Because counting gave his hands something to do. The cold came through his jacket like it had already decided the jacket didn't count. He had been in America for 8 months. His English was good. His father had made sure of that, the same way his father made sure of everything, thoroughly and without asking what Juncio actually wanted. The phone call had come 2 hours earlier. He had missed dinner to take it, walking away from his dormitory roommates with the particular privacy of someone who knew bad news was coming. His father's voice on the line had been exactly the same temperature it always was. Controlled. Certain. You refused the internship. It wasn't a question. Yes. The Han name carries obligations. Juncio. You do not have the luxury of personal preferences. I am not asking for luxury. I am asking for a choice. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a powerful man recalibrating. Then make your choice, his father finally said. And survive it without our name. The line went dead. Juncio had stood in the cold for a moment, holding the phone. Then he walked until he found the store. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Something open. Something lit up. The store was already closed. The lights inside were different, the cleaning kind, low and working. He sat on the concrete step outside and looked at his $4.37 and understood something with perfect clarity. Pride was very expensive. He had known hunger before in the abstract. As a concept his father sometimes referenced to motivate performance. Men in our family have gone hungry so that you would not have to. He had not known it as a physical fact. Now he did. He didn't go inside because the store was closed. He didn't call anyone because the 2 friends he had made would ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. He sat. And a few minutes later, the back door opened and a woman came out carrying a trash bag. She was somewhere in her 50s. Gray uniform. Tired but moving with the kind of purpose that doesn't stop being purposeful just because nobody's watching. She noticed him immediately. Store's closed, she said. Not unkindly. I know. She looked at him more carefully. The jacket that wasn't warm enough. The careful stillness of someone trying not to look like what they were. You eaten today? Pride arrived before honesty did. Then left. He shook his head once. She sighed the way people sigh when they've already made a decision, and the sigh is just acknowledgement. Hold on. She went back inside. He almost left. He thought about it, standing up, walking away, preserving whatever version of himself didn't need a stranger's food. His father's voice was very present in that moment. The Han name carries obligations. He stayed. She came back with a paper bag, warm at the bottom. Inside was fried chicken and 2 biscuits wrapped in foil and a small container of something that steamed when he opened it. He tried to refuse. Not convincingly, but he tried. I can't take your food. She looked at him with the particular patience of a woman who had heard that sentence before and found it unconvincing. You can take kindness, she said. Then she went back inside. He sat alone with the bag in his hands. You can take kindness. 4 words. He ate slowly, and he thought about his grandmother in Seoul, Her hands always smelling like chrysanthemum tea, her insistence on bowing to the woman who cleaned their building, his father's impatience at this habit. She cleans floors. Iyama. She wakes before your children and sleeps after them and makes sure you walk on clean ground. What exactly disqualifies her from your respect? His father had never answered that. Junseo finished every bite. He left the empty bag folded neatly on the step. He did not know her name that night. He found it 3 weeks later when he went back to thank her. Lillian Carter. She had looked surprised that he came back. Then not surprised. Like she had decided people were worth believing in and was occasionally proven right. They talked for 11 minutes outside that store. He told her about his father. She told him briefly about Danielle, 15 years old then, already arguing about whether the system could be fixed from the inside or needed to be rebuilt entirely. What do you think? He asked. I think she's going to find out for herself, Lillian said. That's what the brave ones do. He thought about her on every hard day after that. Not romantically. Not even consciously, most of the time. More the way you carry something that anchored you during a storm. You don't always think about the anchor, but you know you didn't drift because of it. He built his company on a principle he never explained publicly. Internally, inside the ethics framework, there was a standard, a baseline of dignity required in all employee interactions regardless of role or level. He had named it, in his private notes, the Carter Standard. Nobody knew why. Now, sitting in his office after the boardroom cleared, Junseo looked at the file on his desk. Danielle Carter, age 32 at death. One son, named Marcus. He had found this file 6 months ago. He had spent those 6 months building the case carefully, methodically, ensuring every piece was verified before he moved. That was the true part. He had been thorough. But there was another part. A quieter part. He had been afraid of what it would cost. The shareholders, the board relationships, the sole investors who didn't like disorder. He had called it caution. It wasn't caution. He knew the difference. He picked up a piece of paper. He wrote at the top, Dear Marcus. He stopped. He looked at the ceiling. His grandmother had called him the week before the board meeting. She didn't know anything about the case. She was 81 and still sharp and occasionally said things that arrived at truth from directions no one expected. Juna, she had said, is there something you have been waiting to do? He hadn't known how to answer. He knew now. He looked back at the paper and began to write. Danielle Carter's laugh was inconvenient. That was the first thing Lillian thought of now, always, when she tried to remember her daughter whole. Not the end of things. Not the compliance report. Not the silence that came after. The laugh. It arrived without warning, and it was too loud for polite company, and it didn't apologize for itself. It sounded like someone who had decided that joy was worth the noise it made. She had been that way since she was small. Lillian remembered standing in the kitchen of their apartment in Atlanta, the small one with the window that faced the brick wall of the next building, watching 8-year-old Danielle argue with the television during a nature documentary. That's not fair, Danielle had said. The big fish always wins because it's bigger. That's not a lesson. That's just a fact. Baby, it's a fish, Lillian had told her. It's a metaphor, Mama. 8 years old. Using the word metaphor correctly. Looking at the world and immediately asking who designed the rules and whether the design was just. She had never stopped asking that. She graduated from Howard on a Thursday in May. Lillian had pressed her good blouse 3 times the night before because she couldn't sleep. Danielle had walked across that stage with her shoulders back and her name called clearly, and Lillian had stood in the audience and felt something she had no word for. Bigger than pride, more complicated than joy. Something that said, I did not ruin her. Whatever I got wrong, I did not ruin her. She chose this company over 3 other offers. She came home after her first week and sat at Lillian's kitchen table and ate leftover rice and said, Mama, I think this might actually be a place where doing the right thing is rewarded. Lillian had said, I hope so, baby. She had meant it. She was 29 when she found the discrepancy. She had been working late. She almost always worked late, not because anyone asked her to, but because she was that kind of person, the kind who stays until the thing is done and done right. A number in a quarterly filing didn't match its source documentation. Small enough to be a rounding error. Large enough in context to be something else. She called Lillian that night. "Mama, I found something." "What kind of something?" A pause. "The kind you can't unfind." Lillian had known then. Not the specifics, but the weight in Danielle's voice. The specific weight of a person holding something they didn't ask to hold. "What are you going to do?" "What I'm supposed to do," Danielle said. There was never a question in her mind. That was the thing about Danielle. She had looked at the rules of the institution she worked in, and she had believed them. Not naively. She understood power and she understood politics. But she believed that if the rules were followed exactly, precisely, by the letter, they would protect her. She followed every protocol. Her direct supervisor. Then legal. Then the Compliance Oversight Board. Everything documented. Everything time-stamped. They came for her 3 weeks later. Not loudly. The company didn't do anything loudly. It was done in the way that expensive institutions destroy people, through suggestion and paperwork and the slow withdrawal of opportunity. The performance clause that appeared from nowhere. The meetings she stopped being invited to. The colleagues who stopped making eye contact in the hallway. By the time the termination letter arrived, her whole identity inside that building had been quietly renegotiated without her consent. She fought it. She hired a lawyer with money she didn't have. She filed a complaint with the labor board. She documented everything, the same way she documented the original fraud, with the precision of someone who still believed that evidence mattered. The company's legal team was larger than some governments. 14 months after her termination, she was still sending out applications. The rejections came fast. No explanation. Just the flat, courteous language of closed doors. She called Lillian one night. Marcus was asleep, she was whispering, and said, "Mama, I think they made some calls." Lillian had said, "I know, baby. How do I fight something I can't see?" Lillian hadn't had an answer. That was the one she still carried. That specific unanswered question, spoken in a whisper so Marcus wouldn't wake up. Danielle had managed her health carefully for years. A cardiac condition, mild, controllable with medication and low stress. The doctors had always been clear about the stress part. The stress was not low. The medication ran out twice when the insurance lapsed after the termination. She replaced it when she could. Stretched it when she couldn't. She died on a Tuesday morning in February. Marcus was 5. He had been in the next room watching cartoons. Lillian had driven through the night and arrived at the hospital and sat in a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and coffee and was told by a woman in scrubs that her daughter was gone. She sat in that hallway for a long time. She did not scream. She did not fall apart. She sat and she breathed and she thought about Marcus in the next room watching cartoons, and she understood that the only thing left now was to be what he needed. She was 61 years old. She became his whole world. She found the job at the company 6 months later. The legal fees had taken everything. Savings, Danielle's small college fund she'd started for Marcus. The emergency cushion Lillian had built over 40 years of careful living. Gone. When she realized which company she was applying to, she stood on the sidewalk outside for 20 minutes. She thought about Danielle. "You change it from the inside, Mama. That's the only way it sticks." She walked through the door. Now, sitting on a bench outside the building with her phone warm in her hand, she pressed the call button. Marcus answered on the second ring. He was at his after-school program. She could hear voices in the background. He had Danielle's eyes in his school photo, that same particular focus, like the world was a problem worth solving. "Grandma." He said it the way kids say things they mean completely. One word, full of everything. "Hey, baby." Her voice came out steady. She was always steady for him. Grandma had a big day. Did something happen? She looked up at the building. At the glass and steel and everything it had cost. "Something started," she said. A pause. "Is it good or bad?" She thought about the boardroom. About Junseo's bow. About Richard's face when he realized the walls were closing. About Preston Cole saying "I'm sorry" with his voice breaking down the middle. About Danielle's name spoken aloud in the room that had tried to erase it. "I think," she said carefully, "it might be the beginning of something your mama always believed was possible." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Can I get pizza tonight?" Lillian laughed. It surprised her, the laugh, arriving without permission, full and real. That laugh, Danielle's laugh, living in his body. "Yes, baby," she said. "You can get pizza." For the women who have held themselves together so someone smaller wouldn't see them break, this channel is for you. If that's you, you're already home here at Afro Korean Tales and Stories. Richard Hargrove had been in difficult rooms before. Regulatory hearings. Hostile acquisitions. A divorce mediation that lasted 11 hours and ended with his lawyer quietly suggesting he accept terms he hadn't expected to accept. He knew how to be in difficult rooms. You found the exit before anyone else did. You moved toward it calmly. You controlled the narrative as long as possible, and when you couldn't control it anymore, you controlled who got blamed. He was in his office now. Door locked. Jacket off. The folder on the table in front of him like something radioactive. His lawyer was on the phone. How much did he give the regulatory board? Enough. A pause. "Richard, the third-party audit trail it's thorough. Whatever Han's team built, they built it to hold." Richard looked at the folder. The performance clause documentation is time-stamped 4 days after the compliance filing. Our original filing date is embedded in the server metadata. That's not something we can walk back. He set the phone on the desk without hanging up and looked out the window. 32 floors below, New York moved the way it always moved. Indifferent, continuous, completely unconcerned with what was happening in his office. He picked the phone back up. "What's our exposure?" His lawyer paused in the way lawyers pause when they're choosing between accuracy and mercy. "Significant." Richard ended the call. He sat in the silence for a moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out a photograph. 2 men at a company event, 22 years ago. Younger. Laughing. Behind them a banner with the company's original logo, the one they'd replaced in the rebranding. The other man in the photograph was Gerald Moss. Founding partner. 30 years of friendship across that desk, across boardroom tables, across the kind of shared history that makes you believe you know someone's soul. Gerald had come to him 3 years ago with the accounting irregularities already in motion. Not a confession. Gerald didn't do confessions. He had framed it as a correction that needed to happen quietly, a structural issue that proper handling would resolve without disruption. Richard had believed him. That was the part he had never said out loud. He had believed Gerald Moss was correcting a mistake rather than hiding a fraud. And by the time he understood the difference, a 29-year-old woman's career was already being dismantled, and it had seemed, that there was no version of the truth where stopping it didn't destroy everything. 3,000 employees, he had told himself. Their retirement accounts. Their mortgages. He had been protecting something real. He had told himself that story so many times it had stopped feeling like a story and started feeling like a fact. His phone rang. Angela. He looked at the screen for 2 full rings before answering. "Dad." Her voice had the careful quality she'd developed since her residency. Clinical warmth, the kind that could hold bad news without spilling it. "Hey, sweetheart. I saw something online." A pause. A legal notice. Associated with Hargrove and Han Capital. Another pause. "What's happening?" Richard closed his eyes. In 35 years of fatherhood, he had given Angela many things. A good education. Financial security. The particular confidence that comes from knowing someone believes in you unconditionally. He had not given her this. "It's complicated," he said. "Dad." She said it the way she said things when complicated wasn't going to work. "I'm a doctor. I deal with complicated for 12 hours a day. Talk to me." He looked at the photograph. Gerald laughing. Himself laughing. The banner behind them. "There was a compliance report," he said. 3 years ago. A young woman at the company found a financial irregularity. Silence. She reported it through proper channels. Angela was very still on the line. He could feel it. We didn't. He stopped. Started again. I made a decision that the exposure was too significant. That the disruption would hurt too many people. What happened to her? Angela's voice had changed. Not harder. More careful. The way she got when she was building a picture she already suspected she wouldn't like. She was terminated. He kept his voice even. Under a performance clause. Was the performance clause real? He didn't answer. Dad. No, he said. It wasn't. The silence that followed had weight. What happened to her after that? He was quiet for a moment. She couldn't find work in the field. He stopped again. She had a health condition. The stress compounded it. Angela breathed in slowly. She died, he said. 14 months after the termination. She had a 5-year-old son. Silence. Dad. Angela's voice was barely above a whisper. That woman's daughter died. I didn't know it would go that far. But you knew it would go somewhere. He had no answer. Because it was true. He had known that terminating a whistleblower would cost her something. He had calculated that cost as acceptable against the larger number. He had never let himself fully sit with what acceptable cost looked like from the inside of the life being spent. Her name, Angela said quietly. Do you know her name? The question landed differently than he expected. Because the answer was no. He had read the file 3 years ago and processed it as a case number. A risk variable. An exposure to be managed. He had never said her name aloud. Danielle, he said slowly. Danielle Carter. Saying it was different. He hadn't expected that. The cleaning lady in the boardroom today, Angela said. Was that her mother? He said nothing, which was its own answer. Angela was quiet for a long time. I love you, Dad, she finally said. I need you to understand that I love you. He closed his eyes. But I need you to tell the truth now. All of it. Whatever it costs. His lawyer called on the other line. He looked at the screen. Incoming call. Gerald Moss Estate Trustee. His blood went cold. The estate. The trustee. The man managing Gerald's assets after his death 8 months ago. A man Richard had never liked. A man who owed Gerald loyalty but owed Richard nothing. He looked at the photograph one more time. Then he set it face down on the desk. And answered the call. Strong women recognize strong women. If you stay for stories that refuse to let dignity be the price of survival, you're welcome. We have more to tell. The phone rang once in Seoul before his father picked up. Jun Seo had known it would. His father always picked up on the first ring for business calls and the third ring for personal ones. The strategy was so consistent it had stopped being strategy and become reflex. This rang once. So, business then. Jun Seo. Abioji. The formal address. They had stopped using anything warmer years ago without either of them officially deciding to. I've heard from the Seoul investors. His father's voice was the same temperature it had always been. The city sounds of Seoul were faint behind him. Traffic, a distant horn. They are concerned. They should be watching the full picture before forming conclusions. Their conclusion, his father said, is that you disrupted a billion-dollar acquisition process to defend a cleaning woman. Jun Seo stood at his office window. 32 floors. The same view Richard Hargrove had, from a different angle. The same indifferent city below. Her name is Mrs. Carter, he said. A pause. That is not the relevant information here. It is the most relevant information, Jun Seo said. Everything else follows from it. His father made a sound, not quite a sigh, not quite dismissal. Something in between that Jun Seo had been reading since childhood. The regulatory filing, his father continued. You did this intentionally. You built the case and you chose this morning specifically. Yes. Why this morning? Why publicly? Why not handle this through proper channels without the theater? Jun Seo turned from the window. Because proper channels were how it was buried the first time. Silence. The woman, his father said. How do you know her? He had expected this question. He had not fully decided, until this moment, how to answer it. 15 years ago, he said. Atlanta. You had just cut off my accounts. The silence that followed was different from the others. I was outside a convenience store with $4. I hadn't eaten. She was cleaning the store after hours. She brought me food and said 4 words that I have been trying to live up to since. His father's breathing was audible. She was a cleaning woman then as well, Junseo said. You would have walked past her. Junseo. Her daughter reported financial fraud at my company. The board destroyed her for it. She died. She was 32 years old and she died leaving a 5-year-old son. And the woman who fed me when your pride had left me hungry spent 6 years cleaning the floors of the building that killed her child. The words came out evenly. That evenness was the most dangerous thing about them. That woman gave you food, his father said. His voice had shifted, not softer, but more careful. She did not give you the company. She gave me the reason to build it the right way, Junseo said. That is worth more than the company. The line was quiet for a long time. In Seoul, his father would be sitting at the desk in the study that smelled like cypress wood and old paper. He would have his hand flat on the desk the way he always did when he was processing something he hadn't prepared for. You are going to lose the Seoul investors, his father said finally. Some of them. The board restructuring alone will. I know what it will cost. Another silence. Do you? Junseo picked up the letter he had started earlier. The one addressed to Marcus. He had finished it before making this call. I know what it cost not to act, he said. 6 months I waited. 6 months I told myself I was being careful. A boy is growing up without his mother and I waited 6 months. His father did not respond to that directly. When he spoke again, his voice had changed in a way so slight that most people would have missed it. Junseo had been reading that voice his whole life. Your grandmother called me last week, his father said. Junseo waited. She said she'd spoken to you. She said, a pause. She said you sounded like someone standing at a door. I've opened it now. His father made that sound again. The one between dismissal and something else. The Han name, he said. Will survive, Junseo said. It survived you building it from nothing. It will survive me building it right. The line went quiet. For a moment Junseo thought his father had hung up. Then, the woman, Mrs. Carter. Yes. Is she? A pause that lasted just long enough to be significant. Is she all right? Junseo looked at the letter in his hand. She's stronger than either of us, he said. His father said nothing. Then the line went dead. Junseo stood in the silence of his office. He thought about his grandmother, 81 years old in her apartment in Mapogu, her window facing the Han River. She had a photograph on her desk of Junseo at 7 years old, learning to bow. She had taught him the specific weight of the gesture. Not performance. Not hierarchy. It means, I see you. All of you. Not just the part that is useful to me. He looked at the letter. Then he picked up his phone and called his assistant. Get me a courier. I need this delivered to a Mrs. Lillian Carter today. He paused. And find me a florist in Atlanta. His assistant typed something. Then stopped. Sir, is the Atlanta florist for Danielle Carter's grave, he said. Yes. He ended the call. He looked at his desk. At the file that had started all of this. At the Carter Standard note he'd kept for 15 years, tucked inside a leather notebook his grandmother had given him when he first left for America. He opened the notebook. The note was there, in his own handwriting, young and unsteady, the handwriting of a 22-year-old who had just been fed by a stranger and was trying to write down what it meant before it left him. You can take kindness. This means the world has not finished deciding what you're worth. Don't decide for it. He closed the notebook. And outside his window, New York moved on in the way it always did. Indifferent, continuous. But in a filing cabinet in the regulatory board's office across town, a case that had been sealed for 3 years was now open. And in Atlanta, A 7-year-old boy named Marcus was eating pizza and laughing at something on television, his grandmother watching him with the specific expression of a woman who has decided that the future is still worth protecting. And somewhere in a private study in Seoul, a man who had built an empire on the belief that sentiment was a liability sat with his hand flat on a cypress desk. And said nothing. For a very long time. If you're a woman who has ever watched someone you love carry more than they should have had to carry, and chose to stand beside them anyway, this channel was made for you. These stories are told for women like you. Preston Cole had been rehearsing this conversation for 3 years. He had practiced it in his car, in the shower, at 2 a.m. when sleep stopped being available and his mind ran the same loop it always ran. The file, the case number, the supervisor's voice saying your career trajectory depends on your discretion. He had practiced 100 versions. Now he was sitting across from Lillian Carter in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the building, and every version he'd rehearsed had left him completely. She had ordered tea. He had ordered nothing. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the boardroom, not with anger, not with the particular heat of someone who had been waiting to confront you. Just that steady, patient attention that was somehow harder to sit under than fury would have been. "You asked to see me," she said. "Yes. Then talk." He put his hands flat on the table. He had done that in the boardroom too, he realized. Flat hands. Like he was trying to hold himself down. "I was 26, he said. Junior associate. They gave me access to the sealed file as part of a legal classification review. Routine work. Nobody flags routine work." Lillian held her cup but didn't drink. "I read the whole report." He stopped. "I didn't have to. My job was classification, category, access level, filing protocol. I could have done it in 4 minutes without reading a word." "But you read it." "I read it." He looked at the table. It was thorough, meticulous. Every discrepancy documented, cross-referenced, time-stamped. Whoever wrote it knew exactly what she was doing. Something moved in Lillian's face. "Just briefly. I finished reading it and I sat at my desk for about 20 minutes, Preston continued. Then I went to my direct supervisor. Not to report it. Not to escalate it. I went because I didn't know what to do with what I'd read and I needed someone to tell me." "And what did your supervisor tell you?" Preston looked up. "He told me that the matter was being handled at the board level. That my role was limited to classification. That my performance review was coming up in 6 weeks." He paused. "He didn't threaten me directly. He didn't have to." Lillian set her cup down. "So you chose your career?" "Yes." No qualification. No explanation wrapped around it to soften the shape of it. Just yes. Lillian looked at him for a long moment. "Did you know her name?" she asked. He frowned slightly. "It was on the file. Carter, Danielle R. That's a case number with a name attached." Lillian's voice was still quiet. Still even. "Did you know her name? Did you say it out loud? When you went home that night, when you lay down and thought about what you'd read, did you say Danielle?" Preston was quiet. The coffee shop moved around them, a barista calling an order, the bell above the door, 2 women laughing at a corner table. "No," he finally said. "She was a case number to me." Lillian nodded slowly. "That," she said, "is how it happens. Not as an accusation. As a diagnosis." The most precise and terrible thing anyone had said to him in 3 years, spoken without any heat at all. "I kept copies," Preston said. He reached into his jacket. The USB drive was small. Unremarkable. The kind of thing you could carry in a pocket for 3 years without anyone knowing. There are more files than what June Seo's audit found. Internal communications. Email chains from the board-level discussion about her termination. He set it on the table between them. "I don't know why I kept them. I told myself it was insurance. But I think..." He stopped. "I think I kept them because some part of me knew that case numbers eventually become people again." Lillian looked at the drive. She didn't reach for it immediately. "Preston," she said. He looked up. Danielle had a specific way of saying people's names when she wanted them to really hear her. Lillian's voice was careful. She'd pause right before, like she was handing you something fragile. A breath. She would have appreciated what you just said. Preston's jaw tightened. Not in anger. In the specific effort of a man trying to hold his face together. Lillian picked up the drive. She held it in her palm for a moment. "This won't bring her back," she said. "I know. It won't fix what Marcus lost. I know that too." She closed her hand around it. "But it will make sure that what she found, what she risked everything to report, actually changes something." She looked at him. That mattered to her more than the personal cost. "She told me that the night before she filed the report." Preston swallowed. "What did she say?" Lillian was quiet for a moment. "Mama, if this works, the next person who finds something wrong in that building won't have to be as scared as I am right now." "She said she was doing it for the next one," Lillian said. The bell above the door rang. A woman came in, shaking rain off her umbrella. Neither of them noticed. "There's something else on the drive," Preston said. His voice had changed. Lower, more careful. The voice of someone releasing something they've been holding a long time. "An email. Sent the night before your daughter's termination was processed." Lillian waited. "It's between Richard and Gerald Moss." He looked at her directly. Gerald knew about Danielle's health condition. "It's referenced in the email. Not as a concern." He paused. "As a variable." The air in the coffee shop did not change. But something in Lillian's eyes did. Slow. Irreversible. The specific change that happens when grief gets a fact to attach itself to and becomes something with sharper edges. She stood up. She put the drive in her pocket. She picked up her purse. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Her voice was the same as it had always been. Steady. Even. Undefeated. But her hand, at her side, had closed into a fist. And she was already walking toward the door when Preston said, quietly to her back, "I'm going to the regulatory board tomorrow. Full testimony. On record." She paused at the door. Didn't turn. "Don't do it for me," she said. "I know. Do it because Danielle's name is on that file. A beat. Make sure they say it right." She walked out into the rain. And Preston Cole sat alone at the table with his flat hands, and his 3 years of silence, and the specific weight of a man who had finally started, however late, to become someone his younger self would recognize. But upstairs, in a corner office on the 28th floor, a man had just received a phone call that made everything that had happened today look like a prologue. This channel is for women who have learned the hard way that dignity is not negotiable. If that sounds like home to you, great. You belong here. Marcus had sauce on his shirt before they even left the restaurant. Lillian noticed and said nothing. Some things mattered. Some things didn't. She had spent the last 3 years getting very precise about which was which. He was 7 and he walked the way Danielle had walked, with the specific forward momentum of someone who had somewhere to be even when they didn't. His head slightly ahead of the rest of him like his mind was already at the next thing. The park was 3 blocks from their apartment. They went on Saturdays when the weather allowed. It had been their routine since he was old enough to have a routine. The same bench near the fountain, the same path around the pond, the same argument about whether the ducks were friendly or merely strategic about appearing friendly. "They want the bread," Marcus said with great certainty. "They don't actually like us." "Maybe both can be true," Lillian said. He considered this with the seriousness he applied to most things. "That's kind of sad," he said. "Or practical." He threw a piece of bread toward the water. The ducks moved immediately. "See," he said. Lillian smiled. She had learned to hold 2 things at once, the grief that lived permanently in the left side of her chest and the absolute, uncomplicated love that arrived every time Marcus said see, with that particular satisfaction. They did not cancel each other out. They coexisted the way weather and shelter coexist. One real, the other also real. Grandma. Did the people who hurt Mama ever say sorry? She had known this question was coming. Not today specifically, but coming. He asked about Danielle with the regularity and directness of a child who had been raised to understand that his mother's absence had a reason, and reasons deserved honest answers. Lillian looked at the water. One of them started to, she said. Marcus threw more bread. Methodical. Equal distribution. He was like that. Fair to the ducks even when the ducks were only being strategic. What about the rest? We're working on it. He was quiet for a moment. Does sorry fix it? She turned to look at him. He was watching the ducks, his profile carrying Danielle's jaw, Danielle's particular quality of attention, the way she gave her full focus to whatever she was looking at, as if everything deserved to be seen properly. No, baby, Lillian said. Sorry doesn't fix it. He looked at her then. Then why do we want it? She thought about Preston Cole's voice in the coffee shop. No. She was a case number to me. She thought about Richard's face in the boardroom when he finally said Danielle's name. She thought about what it had cost her daughter to walk into that building every day believing that institutions could be made worthy of belief. Because it's where fixing has to start, she said. Sorry is the door. It's not the room. Marcus thought about this. Okay, he said. Not performing understanding. Just filing it somewhere for later, the way he did with things that were too big to finish processing immediately. They walked the rest of the path in the comfortable quiet that was one of the particular gifts of raising a child who understood that silence wasn't emptiness. They were back at the bench when he said, without looking at her, I want to be a lawyer. Lillian went still. When did you decide that? Tuesday. He said it matter-of-factly. We learned about laws at school. How they're supposed to protect people. I want to know why they didn't protect Mama. The left side of her chest. That permanent weather. That is an excellent reason to become a lawyer, she said. Her voice came out even. She was very good at even. He nodded like it was settled. Can we get ice cream on the way home? She laughed. The same laugh as before, arriving without permission, full and real. Danielle's laugh living in this boy's ability to move from grief to ice cream in one breath, because that was how children survived things that adults barely could. Yes, baby. We can get ice cream. They walked home through the early evening, Marcus slightly ahead as always, his mind already at the next thing. The letter from Juncio was under the door when they got back. Thick envelope. Company stationery. Her name written by hand. She made Marcus his bath before she opened it. She read it at the kitchen table while he splashed and narrated an elaborate battle between a rubber shark and a submarine. The letter was 2 pages. The first page was an explanation, the foundation being established in Danielle's name, the Whistleblower Protection Fund, the legal defense grants for future compliance reporters. The language was formal but not cold. The kind of language written by someone who cared about the words and wanted them to land correctly. The second page was different. It was shorter. Mrs. Carter, I placed flowers at Danielle's grave today. I stood there for a while and I talked to her. I don't know if that is something you do in your tradition. In mine it is. I told her what I should have said 3 years ago when I first found the file and chose caution over courage. I told her that her findings were correct, her methods were impeccable, and the fault was never hers. I told her that her son is being raised by a woman of extraordinary character. And I told her that this company is still learning what she already knew. I will spend however long it takes making that true. HJS. Lillian read it twice. She folded it carefully. She put it with her important papers, the folder where she kept Marcus's birth certificate, his school records, Danielle's diploma, the photograph of Danielle at 29, the week before she filed the report, standing in the kitchen with her Howard sweatshirt and that inconvenient laugh caught mid-arrival. Marcus called from the bathroom. Grandma! The shark one! Of course he did, she said. She closed the folder. She sat at the table for just a moment longer. They know your name now, Danny. Every single one of them knows your name. Then she got up. Because a boy needed to be dried off and read to and there was still living to be done. But across town, in a hospital on the east side, a woman was sitting in a waiting room with her father's file in her hands. And what she had just read in it had changed everything she thought she knew about the story. Angela Hargrove had not cried in a clinical setting since her second year of residency. She had trained herself out of it, not because she didn't feel things, but because she had learned that feeling things and functioning in them were two separate skills and medicine required both. She was not in a clinical setting now. She was in her car, parked outside the hospital where she worked, with her father's personal medical file open on her lap. Not a patient file, her father's file, which he had asked her to review because his own doctor was on leave and he trusted her, and it had seemed, when he asked, like a simple thing. It was not a simple thing. The file showed a history of cardiac irregularities beginning 3 years ago. 3 years ago. The same month as Danielle Carter's termination. She understood, with a clinical precision she could not turn off even now, that this was not the file of a man who had buried a whistleblower without consequence. This was the file of a man who had been paying for it in the specific currency of the body: elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep architecture, the particular physiological signature of chronic, unresolved guilt. Her father was not a monster who felt nothing. He was a man who felt everything and had been running from it for 3 years. That was not an excuse. She knew that. But it was information. She closed the file. She sat in the dark parking lot and thought about Lillian Carter sitting across a table from her and saying files disappear, mothers don't. She thought about a 5-year-old boy who was now 7 and wanted to be a lawyer. She thought about her father's voice on the phone. I didn't know it would go that far. But you knew it would go somewhere. She started the car. She drove to her parents' house. Her father was in the study. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically. He was still the same broad-shouldered presence she had grown up believing was immovable. But something structural had changed. The certainty that had always organized him was gone, and without it, he looked like a building whose framework had been quietly removed. He looked up when she came in. "You read it," he said. She sat down across from him. 3 years, she said. "Your body has been telling you the truth for 3 years." He looked at the desk. "Angela, I'm not here as your doctor." She kept her voice steady. "I'm here as your daughter. And I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." He looked at her. "Did you know about her health condition?" The question sat between them. She watched his face. And she saw it, not guilt arriving, but guilt being acknowledged. The specific expression of someone who has been holding a fact they hoped would never be asked about directly. "There was an email," he said. Her throat tightened. "Gerald sent it the night before the termination was processed. He mentioned," Richard stopped. "He mentioned that she had a cardiac history. He said it as context. I don't know what context he intended." "But you read it." "Yes. And you processed the termination anyway." Silence. "Dad." Her voice cracked slightly on the word. "Just slightly. That email makes this negligence at minimum. At maximum it makes it. I know what it makes it." He said it with a flatness that was not indifference. It was the sound of a man who had been living inside that knowledge for 3 years and was finally being allowed to put it down. "The regulatory board is going to find it," Angela said. "Preston Cole's testimony is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Whatever he has." "He has everything," Richard said quietly. She stared at him. "I knew he kept copies." Richard leaned back in his chair. "I've known for 2 years. I didn't move against him because I think some part of me understood that when this came apart, it needed to come apart completely." Angela stood up. She walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, the specific quiet of money insulating itself from consequence, the large houses set back from the street, the careful landscaping, all of it maintained to a standard that made difficulty look like it happened to other people. "You're going to cooperate fully," she said. "Not a question." "Yes. You're going to say her name in every room they put you in." He was quiet. "Danielle Carter." She turned from the window. Her name was Danielle Carter. She was 32 years old. She had a son and a cardiac condition, and she believed in doing the right thing, and she is dead, and her son is being raised by a 67-year-old woman because of decisions made in your boardroom. Richard closed his eyes. "Say her name, Dad." A long silence. "Danielle Carter," he said. His voice broke on it. For the first time in 3 years, for possibly the first time since the termination letter was processed, Richard Hargrove said that name and felt the full weight of what it meant. Angela watched him. She did not move toward him. She loved him. She also understood that some things should not be made comfortable too quickly. That some weight needed to be held fully before it could be set down with any integrity. "Her mother is a good woman," Angela said finally. "I know. When this is over, if she's willing, I think you should meet her properly." She paused. Not to be forgiven. Not to manage the optics. Just to look at her and say it directly. Richard said nothing for a long time. Then his phone lit up on the desk. A news alert. She saw the headline from across the room before he picked it up. Hargrove and Hahn Capital. Second board member confirms whistleblower suppression. Regulatory hearing set for Friday. Richard looked at it. He set the phone face down. And reached for the pen. If you've ever loved someone who had to pay too high a price for doing the right thing, this channel carries their stories. We don't forget them here. The church smelled like cedar wood and old hymnals and something underneath that. Candle wax and time, maybe, the specific accumulation of decades of people bringing their hardest things to a quiet room and leaving a little lighter. June Seo sat in the front pew and held the document in both hands. Pastor Williams had let him in without ceremony. An older man, unhurried, who had known Danielle since she was 11 years old and sang too loud in the children's choir and argued with the Sunday school teacher about whether Goliath deserved more narrative sympathy. She was always asking who wrote the rules, the pastor had said, and whether the rules were fair. Then he had left June Seo alone. The church was empty. Outside, Atlanta moved in its Saturday morning way, unhurried, warm even in the early hour, the sound of the city present but muted through the old walls. June Seo looked at the document in his hands. It was not a legal filing. Not a regulatory submission. Not the kind of paper that moved markets or restructured boards. It was a formal acknowledgement. Written on company letterhead. Signed by him as CEO and by the 2 new board members who had come in after the restructuring. It said, in plain language, without corporate softening, Danielle R. Carter, compliance officer, filed an accurate and thorough report of financial irregularity on March 14, 3 years prior. Her findings were correct. Her methods were professional and precise. The company's response to her report was wrongful, retaliatory, and caused documented harm to her career, her financial stability, her health, and ultimately her life. This acknowledgement does not constitute legal absolution. It constitutes the truth, stated plainly, in the name of the institution that failed her. He read it aloud. Slowly. No one heard it but the cedar walls and the old hymnals and whatever it is that stays in rooms where people have been honest for a long time. He folded it. He placed it on the pew beside him. Then he sat in the quiet for a while. He thought about his grandmother's question. "Is there something you have been waiting to do?" He had called her after the board meeting. She had listened to everything. The boardroom, Lillian, the regulatory filing, his father's call, without interruption, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she had said, "The bow you gave her. Was it genuine?" "Yes. Halmoni." "Then the rest will follow," she said. "The bow is always where it starts." He had not fully understood what she meant until this morning, sitting in this pew, reading that document aloud to an empty room. The bow was the decision to see someone. The rest, the filing, the foundation, the letter to Marcus, this church, the grave he was going to visit after, was just the bow extended across time. He stood. Pastor Williams was waiting near the door. They drove together in the pastor's old car. June Seo had offered his rental, but the pastor had waved it off with the easy authority of a man in his own city. The cemetery was 20 minutes away. Quiet. Well kept. The kind of place that held its dignity without effort. Danielle's grave was simple. A headstone with her name, her dates, and a line that Lillian had chosen. She believed the truth was worth the cost. June Seo stood in front of it. He had the flowers, white chrysanthemums, which his grandmother had suggested when he called her from the florist, uncertain. "White is for honoring the dead in our tradition," she had said. But ask what she would have wanted. He had asked Lillian. Lillian had said, She liked yellow. She said white flowers at funerals always looked like they were apologizing. So he had yellow flowers. Bright, almost aggressive yellow. The kind that didn't apologize. He set them down. He stood in front of the headstone and he didn't perform. He didn't practice what he was going to say the way he had practiced nothing in this entire process, because he had learned, somewhere between Atlanta 15 years ago and this morning in the church pew, that the things that mattered most couldn't be rehearsed. Your mother kept you alive in that building for 6 years, he said quietly. Every floor she mopped, every corridor she walked, she was carrying you with her. You were never invisible in that place. Not to her. The yellow flowers moved slightly in the breeze. I found your file 6 months before I acted. I want you to know that I know that. I'm not asking you to forgive the delay. I just want it said plainly because you were someone who believed in saying things plainly. He paused. Your son wants to be a lawyer. He told your mother at the park yesterday. He wants to understand why the laws didn't protect you. Something moved in his throat. He's going to be extraordinary. He already is. He has your mother's steadiness and, from what she tells me, your particular relationship with the truth. He bowed. The same bow. The one his grandmother had pressed into him at 7 years old. The one he had given Lillian in the boardroom. Full. Deliberate. The specific bow that meant, I see you. All of you. Not just the part that was useful to me. He held it for a moment. Then he straightened. He stood there a little longer, in the Atlanta morning, with the yellow flowers and the honest headstone. Then his phone vibrated. He looked at it. A message from his assistant. The Seoul investors held a vote this morning. 11 of 14 chose to remain. His father's associates were among those who stayed. He read it twice. He put his phone away. He looked at the headstone one more time. She believed the truth was worth the cost. So did the right people, he said quietly. He walked back to the car. And in New York, at that same moment, a regulatory hearing was being called to order. And Richard Hargrove was walking in without his lawyers. The hearing room was not dramatic. That was the first thing Lillian noticed. She had expected something more cinematic. High ceilings, formal regalia, the visible architecture of consequence. Instead, it was a conference room on the 14th floor of a federal building. Fluorescent lights. A long table. Water pitchers nobody touched. She was not required to be there. Juncio had told her that clearly. She had no legal obligation to attend. The regulatory board had Preston's testimony, the USB files, the audit trail, the acknowledgement letter, and now Richard's decision to cooperate without counsel, which had sent his legal team into a controlled panic and sent the board's case forward by approximately 6 weeks. She came anyway. She sat in the back row. She wore her good coat. Not because she was performing anything. Because Danielle had taught her that how you show up to important things matters. Not for the room, but for yourself. You don't dress up for them, Mama. You dress up so you remember who you are when you walk in. Richard walked in at 9:04. He looked like a man who had not slept in days, which, Angela had quietly told Lillian in a brief phone call that morning, was accurate. He had been awake since Thursday. He sat down at the table. He looked across the room. He saw Lillian. She watched him find her. Watched the specific thing that moved across his face. Not surprise, because Angela had told him she might be there. Something else. The expression of a man who had spent 3 years avoiding a reckoning and was now, for the first time, choosing to face it instead. He did not look away. Neither did she. The hearing officer called the room to order. Richard opened the folder in front of him. My name is Richard Hargrove, he said. I was a senior board member at Hargrove and Hahn Capital for 22 years. In that capacity, 3 years ago, I made a decision that I have described to myself in many different ways since then. Today I am going to describe it accurately. The room was still. A compliance officer named Danielle Carter filed an accurate and thorough report of financial irregularity. The report was correct. The methods were professional. The board's response, which I authorized, was retaliatory. The performance clause used to terminate her was fabricated and backdated. The subsequent damage to her professional reputation was deliberate. He turned a page. I was aware of her cardiac health condition prior to the termination. That information was provided by a founding partner in an email I have submitted to this board. I did not use that information to target her health. But I processed the termination in full possession of that information, and I did not stop. His voice held. It held the way structures hold when they've been stripped to their essential components. Not because they're strong, but because there's nothing left to hide behind. Danielle Carter died 14 months after her termination. She was 32 years old. She had a son. Her name should be in every policy this company writes going forward, and in every training this industry delivers to people who might someday stand where she stood and wonder whether the rules will protect them. He closed the folder. He looked directly at the hearing officer. I am prepared to answer every question in full. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Lillian stayed for all of it. She did not speak. She was not asked to speak. She sat in the back row in her good coat, and she listened to her daughter's story told by the people who had tried to bury it, told accurately, told with the kind of detail that only comes from people who were present. She heard Danielle's name said 47 times. She counted. Because names mattered. Because that was the thing she had asked Preston to make sure of, and it was the thing that had driven every step of this. Not the board's destruction, not Richard's humiliation, not the regulatory penalties that would follow. Her daughter's name said correctly, in a room with the authority to make it matter. Afterward, in the hallway, Richard found her. His lawyer was not with him. He stood in front of her with the specific posture of a tall man making himself smaller, not from strategy, but from something more honest than strategy. "Mrs. Carter," he said. She waited. "I know that nothing I say." "Then don't say that part," she said quietly. He stopped. "Just say the thing you came over here to say." He looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "Not for the legal exposure. Not because my daughter told me to. Because Danielle Carter was a person, and I processed her like a variable, and she deserved better than what I gave her. She deserved better than what this industry gave her." Lillian looked at him for a long moment. "That's the door," she said. He frowned slightly. "I told my grandson that sorry is the door. It's not the room." She held his gaze. "You opened the door today. What you build in the room after this is the part that counts." He nodded slowly. He didn't ask for forgiveness. She respected him more for not asking. She walked back toward the elevator. Junseo was waiting near the door. She had not known he was there. He had flown back from Atlanta that morning. He looked at her. "How are you?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "I'm the best I've been in 3 years," she said. Then she looked at him carefully. "Your foundation letter. The senior integrity advisor position." He waited. "Danielle said you change things from the inside." He was very still. "I'd like to accept the position," she said. Something moved in his face. Not surprise. Relief. Deep, structural relief. "There's one condition," she said. "Name it." "The Danielle Carter whistleblower protection standards we build. I want Preston Cole in the room when we write them." Junseo looked at her for a moment. "Because the people who almost looked away are the ones who know exactly where the gaps are," she said. He nodded once. "Done." She pressed the elevator button. And upstairs, in a conference room on the 14th floor, a regulatory board was writing findings that would change the way compliance reports were handled in this industry for the next 20 years. They cited Danielle Carter by name. 47 times became 48. If you believe that what we build after we say sorry matters more than the sorry itself, this channel is for you. The stories here don't end at the apology. 6 months later, Lillian Carter stood at a podium. Not the boardroom. A larger space. The company's main conference hall, full to the last seat. Employees from every level, every department, every floor of the building she had mopped for 6 years. She was wearing a navy blazer she had bought with her first paycheck from her new role. She had a speech in her jacket pocket. 2 pages. Written by hand at her kitchen table while Marcus did his homework across from her, occasionally looking up to offer editorial opinions. "Is it too long, Grandma?" Probably. Is it good though? I think so, baby. Then it's fine. She stood at the podium and looked out at the room. She reached into her pocket. She held the speech for a moment. Then she folded it and put it back. Some things couldn't be rehearsed. My daughter's name was Danielle Carter, she said. The room was immediate in its quiet. The specific quiet of people who already knew the name and understood what it meant in this building. She was not a symbol. She was not a cautionary tale. She was not a compliance case or a whistleblower statistic. Lillian paused. She was a woman who wore her Howard University sweatshirt on weekends, who argued with me about whether institutions could be changed from inside or needed to be rebuilt from the ground up, who made too much noise when she laughed and not enough noise when she should have been louder. Something moved through the room. Not a sound. A shift. She chose to work here because she believed this place was worth believing in. I want you to understand the weight of that. She had other options. She chose this one because she thought that people who found things wrong had a responsibility to say so, and that institutions that were worth anything would listen. She looked around the room, at the employees who had never met Danielle, at Preston Cole standing near the back wall, quiet and present, at June Seo at the side of the room, watching with that particular focused stillness. At the front row, Marcus, 7 years old, best shirt, sitting with the careful posture of a child who understood this was important without fully understanding all the reasons why. He caught her eye. He gave her a small nod. You're doing good, Grandma. She kept going. The only wealth no one can steal, she said, is the decision to see people. All the way. Every day. Especially the people in the gray uniforms. Especially the people whose names you don't know yet. Especially the person sitting across from you right now who has found something wrong and is trying to decide whether this place is safe enough to say so. She let that land. Make it safe. That's the whole job. Every title, every role, every floor of this building. The entire job is to make it safe for the next Danielle to do what she did without it costing her everything. She stepped back from the podium. Marcus started clapping. He started it before anyone else, both hands, completely certain, the way children are certain about the things that matter. The room followed. Afterward, in the hallway outside the conference room, Lillian and June Seo stood side by side while Marcus ran ahead toward the elevator with the specific urgency of a child who had been sitting still long enough. Marcus! Lillian called. He slowed. Barely. June Seo watched him. He moves like someone who has somewhere important to be, he said. He always does, Lillian said. Since he could walk. Danielle was the same way. Always slightly ahead of herself. A pause. She would have found 3 things wrong with the policy language by now, Lillian said. June Seo laughed. A real laugh. Not a CEO laugh. The laugh of a person genuinely, unexpectedly delighted. Already fixed 2 of them, he said. What about the 3rd? He looked at her. That's why I need you. She shook her head slowly. But she was smiling. Come on, she said. My grandson wants lunch. Marcus was holding the elevator door open, one arm stuck in the gap. Impatient, Danielle's eyes lit up with a particular urgency of someone who had already decided waiting was optional. Grandma, it's not going to hold forever. I'm coming, baby. She walked toward him. June Seo fell into step beside her. The elevator doors opened wide. They stepped in. The doors closed. And the hallway was quiet. On the wall near the conference room, a small brass plaque had been installed that morning. Simple. Clean. The kind of thing that didn't announce itself. You had to be walking close to read it. In honor of Danielle R. Carter, who believed that doing the right thing was worth the cost. This company is still learning what she knew. The hallway held it. The building held it. And somewhere in Atlanta, in a cemetery on a quiet street, yellow flowers, bright, unapologetic, the kind that didn't apologize, still stood in front of a headstone. She believed the truth was worth the cost. She had been right. It was. It always was. If this story reached something in you, the part that has always known that dignity is not a luxury but a right, then you already belong here. Subscribe. For the women who never stopped believing the truth was worth it. We'll keep telling these stories as long as you're here. Thank you for watching Afro-Korean Tales and Stories. As we close this story, I want to say something to the women watching. Some of you have lived through moments like this. Moments where you had to stand alone. Moments where you chose dignity over comfort. Moments where you refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside. That kind of strength doesn't always make noise, but it changes rooms. If you are a woman who believes respect is worth more than money, if you believe character still matters, if you believe dignity should never be negotiated, then this channel was made for you. I tell stories about women who stand firm, women who earn respect without begging for it, women who remind powerful people that integrity cannot be purchased. If that speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community. And if this story touched you, comment the word dignity below. I read your comments, and they help these stories reach more women like you. Until the next story, remember, not every powerful person leads with honor, but every strong woman carries it within her. I'll see you in the next one.